Hey everybody, at long last, I finally came around to doing this. It's been promised several times, but here is my definitive argument why the Wheel of Prime is worse than the Rings of Power. This is an exercise in rhetoric by yours truly, Dain Bornhald, Esquire. In keeping with the fine traditions of rhetoric, I have decided to segment my arguments in threes. You'll notice I'll have three main arguments with three supporting sub-arguments for each and three examples for each of that. So 27, I think. Anyways, yeah, here's a quick summary of why I think that the Wheel of Prime is much worse than the Rings of Power. The first argument is going to be it's a corruption of a narrative. I've mentioned that several times before. I'm going to lay it out exactly what's wrong and what's so egregious about that. The second argument, usually the weakest argument when you do these rhetoric structures of three, technical incompetence. I'm not saying that this is a weak argument. It's just not as good as the third one, which is I believe there's actual malice involved with Wheel of Prime. So everybody who's watching this, feel free to provide a rebuttal or a counter argument. It doesn't need to be related to my reasons at all. You don't need to defend the show. You could attack Rings of Prime in a different way. For example, you could argue that Tolkien's work is of greater cultural significance and therefore attacks against it are more harmful to the society at large and therefore more egregious. Diving in, argument number one, the corruption of a narrative. So unlike the Rings of Power, which is just appendices and people imagining certain events that would have to happen and compressed and whatnot, the Wheel of Prime actually had a narrative story to follow. The fact that they don't follow it compounds the stupidity in that if the story doesn't make sense, you ask, well, why didn't you just use what you had? As a result, season one of Wheel of Prime is actually a complete corrupted mess, and it manifests by having the show writers do self-inserts and fixes in air quotes, obviously. There's token fan service all over the place that makes no sense to the uninitiated. And they accidentally subvert probably their own message to the extent that these changes are the result of their ideology, do more to impair their own ideology. And it's actually quite funny. And we can only presume that it's done accidentally. So those are my three sub-arguments around my first argument that this is the corruption of the narrative. So getting into the show writers' self-inserts and fixes. They added new plot points in a story that was ostensibly pressed for time. So Steppen received his own episode. Boy, howdy, was that fun. Logain got an episode as well. Remember that? Yeah. And so did Moraine, where she and Swan scissor. They also fixed the show to make it more mature and less young adult. I'm probably not the only one. Super glad they did this, right? So let's, have Perrin axe his wife, add some grimdark. That was fun. And Matt, oh, he's too lovable. So let's make him an evil thief from a broken home. And let's add in lots of sex, and some pegging. Yeah. Then the other thing that they did to fix it for 2021 is they ungendered Robert Jordan's gendered magic system. And this leads to a whole bunch of weird things like who can see or sense the weaves? Master Hightower apparently can. That Saw-Angreal that Moraine was carrying around the whole time, yeah, it could have worked for Rand, could have worked if it was Egwene, probably. And over, they'd keep mentioning annoying dialogue that the dragon could be male or female, man or woman. Let them kill myself, whatever, thems everywhere. She or he's in the dialogue. Then we get into the token fan service. So there's plenty of lore in the book, in the show, but none of it's really explained for the uninitiated. So they mention rumors of Ford ta'veren, itself a little bit lore-breaking in that there would never be rumors about it, but they don't even bother to explain what a ta'veren is for the audience. Rand finds a book on the Koreathon cycle. It's basically mentioned and then never, mentioned again. And Moraine has got a traveling ter'angreal, but then she still decides to use the ways. Sure. Then we get Easter eggs. There are Easter eggs all over the place, and they're pretty stupid. So you got the lining of Tom's duster. Why couldn't he have just had a patchwork cloak? I don't know. Here's some fan service. Dragon's fang in the woods. Lan sees it's upside down, but and it's done by Trollocs apparently. Whatever, fan service. And then the eye-eel in a cage with a stone dog. You're not getting Gaul. And the result of this ultimately is that there are scenes and plot points from the book that no longer make sense. So they deviate from Robert Jordan, but then they have to get back to the story. And these course corrections basically no longer line up with the show. So they leave the Two Rivers with a whole bunch of Trollocs inbound. Then, after Shatter Logoth, they hike up a mountain searching for Egwene. It's logical that he would do that, but in the books, he's on a boat and he can't get back there. But why the hell is he doing this, climbing up a mountain, screaming into the wind, looking for Egwene? And then, of course, the most egregious example of this is Lan's Pump and Dump, where they basically went back to the story. They included this dialogue about Nynaeve being a lioness, but since it happened after they had sex, it just makes Lan look like a scumbag. Thirdly, with the whole corruption of a narrative, there's the accidental subversion. So many of these changes that they do, they hilariously undermine their own progressive message. So you have Steppen, who got his own episode. He kills himself rather than going gay with the other warders. The Aes Sedai power levels are completely undermined. And if you know anything about Wheel of Time and the amount of effort that Robert Jordan did into establishing power levels amongst the Aes Sedai, it's so bad. And then you have the Black Wind that actually just tells the truth, because nothing is scarier to a progressive than someone who tells them how it is. Then they injected representation with unintended consequences. So Swan's Black Father literally sends her up the river. Father of the Year right there. Nynaeve, she likes to eat fried chicken. And the Two Rivers is now diverse, and therefore it cannot become diverse, which is a fantastic plot point for Book 6. Ultimately, too, they subvert and destroy many of the female characters, unintentionally. So Swan Sanche, powerful female ruler? No. She's actually a tyrant, and she behaves worse than Hitler. Nynaeve is a light skirt, just having sex everywhere. And Moraine is a complete and utter moron. Every decision she makes is completely out of character because it's a decision that would only be made by someone who had, I don't know, half a brain at most. The second overarching argument that I would make about Wheel of Prime and why it's worse than Rings of Power is the technical incompetence. This does not look like a quality production. Any program is going to have a tough time matching the monumental failure that is this horrendous level of filmmaking. So we can find serious flaws in a number of things. And again, these are my three sub-arguments. We have costuming, set, and special effects. There's editing, shot framing, and direction. And thirdly, story continuity. So let's go into costuming, set, and special effects. So they went out of their way to ignore the existing lore and what the costume should look like, and the net result of this is ultimately that the Aes Sedai don't wear dresses. They wear robes. But the White Cloaks do wear dresses, which is, yeah. And then ultimately, all you really have to do is throw up a picture of Loial, and you can basically say they have no idea what they're doing with the costuming, and it's just silly. Nothing looks as ridiculous as this. The set design was also equally appalling. So the ways look something out of 90s Trek, specifically Star Trek Voyager. I'm pretty sure they had this episode. Shatter Logoth uses the same set as Tar Valon. And the White Tower is basically 4 rooms. And you can tell that it's 4 rooms. We've got the balcony. We've got the hallway. We've got the one room that gets used for everything, including Steppen's funeral in his own bedroom. And then you have the circular hall of the tower. That's it. Finally, the special effects look like something like Mass Effect Andromeda. There's interpretive dance fighting with wisps, that's your channeling. There are comically bad Trollocs from the first and second episodes, and they somehow got even dumber by the end of it. It's not just limited to that, there's also the editing, shot framing, and direction. So basic editing seems to be completely forgotten. And this is evident in the first 10 seconds. Moiraine wears her ring before she puts it on. Don't doubt me, there's her ring. 4 seconds later, she's putting it on. Then, in a later episode, Warders and Aes Sedai take about 1 minute to walk 50 feet. Here I've included the timestamps. This is at 5 minutes, 28 seconds. You see those Aes Sedai at the start of the bridge. This is at 6 minutes, 29 seconds, and they're about 50 feet ahead. They're not going this slow. And if those are kind of forgivable, hello. The action sequences aren't any better. So the fourth episode had a big battle that's just shaky cam and silly rope work. Don't believe me? Yeah, that's actually a body flying through the air up there. Then there was the attack of the wolf shadow puppets. Literally, they didn't have wolves, they did a dog, so how did they make it look more menacing? Shadow puppetry. And yeah, you know where this is going. The placenta snow. This is the silliest action fight I've ever seen in my life. And sorry, no one could think this looks cool or is defensible in any way. I mean, for crying out loud. She's pregnant. Blocking and direction was also nonsensical with basic problems and edits everywhere. So, for example, the White Cloaks, when you first meet them, they're at a fork in the road and they're actually going the other direction. They could have basically just stopped up and let them pass. The Tinkers, they're going in the wrong direction too. They're going into the setting sun, which is the wrong way to Tar Valon. And then, of course, we've got the chase in Breen Spring, this town with one road, where you've got Matt and Rand going that way, Dana going that way, going the opposite directions, and they somehow meet up, like they're walking in a cul-de-sac. Lastly, story continuity. So this has something to do with some of the earlier changes to the narrative, but you'd think even if they're going to do some changes, that they'd have a continuity editor to make sure that these mistakes don't happen. So Moiraine is a witness to the vileness. This is a big deal. She doesn't even react when she sees it in the first episode. She just goes on with her mission. She never brings it up, even though there are apparently rumors that other characters talk about. And then she completely forgets that she has this leverage over the Reds who are doing these illegal things in the Hall of the Tower scene. And instead, she decides to bow down in front of the Amyrlin because she cannot say. It's completely ridiculous. Another problem with story continuity is that Swan sends everyone to the eye of the world because of a dream. And in the dream, she sees that the Dark One is weak, thinks we can destroy him. And then this is despite Moiraine initially being very mistrustful of dreams. And in the next episode, there are just signs everywhere that the Dark One's strength is actually growing. Pick a lane. Lastly, there's a central plot in the Eye of the World, and that's Rand's identity crisis. His arc is impaired intentionally in order to maintain the Dragon Reborn mystery. So all he does is simp, and everybody knows it. That's the only character trait he has. But then, in the post-nut reveal, they basically show the audience that he knew the whole time that Tam was not his father. They show the scene from Winter Night, completely undermining his character and making it that nothing made sense that he was actually doing in the 7 episodes in between. Lastly, I think there is actual malice involved with the people who made Wheel of Prime that really wasn't present in Rings of Power. And this is because Rings of Power is just too stupid. But here are my arguments as to why there's actual malice involved in Wheel of Prime. So there were some statements made online. I'll end on that. But in essence, in life, Robert Jordan was very protective of his work. You can see that in various interviews that he gave or his email feedback on the New Spring graphic novel, which is in an appendix to it. And the Wheel of Prime maliciously attacked the setting, the plot, and the characters. So how did they attack the setting? Well, picking one, the first one, the warders, they just come off terrible in spite of their enhanced profile on the show. They're basically reduced to sexual playthings for the Aes Sedai, which is just gross. They all come from broken homes, including Maxim, who unfortunately wasn't killed by his father at age 12. And then there is Blood Calls Blood. I've mentioned this before, but the chapter Blood Calls Blood from Book 2 ends with Lan imparting the wisdom, there's one rule for being a man, whatever else, face it on your feet. In the episode Blood Calls Blood, the one rule for being a man is apparently to fall onto your knees and pinch your nipples and cry. Unbelievable subversion. Another element of the setting that they undermined are the Dark Friends. They only meet one on the road to Tar Valon. This Dark Friend is apparently not motivated by power, wealth, or immortality, as all the Dark Friends are in the books. That's this chick. At first, she seems actually a bit fame-hungry. And ultimately, what she does is she steals Ishmael's nihilism and is depicted sympathetically. It's worth noting that only really Ishmael gets this nihilistic among the Dark Friends. Virtually every other villain in the Wheel of Time is motivated more by wealth or power or glory. But she wants to break the wheel. Yeah, thanks for that. Why don't you just wreck the plot for book 14 by the third episode? Why don't you? Lastly, for the setting, they utterly and intentionally butchered the magic system. It's no longer gender binary. That's evidenced by all the dialogue and mechanics that they've introduced. They completely forget about things like linking until they conveniently remember about it for the plot. And as mentioned earlier, the power levels are completely incoherent. In the plot, Sneed pointed this out in one of our early White Cloaks reviews, they did not want to actually tell a story about the Dragon Reborn. They turned it into a mystery box intentionally to underdevelop the Dragon Reborn story. They undermined all of the prophecies and foreshadowing, which are such a central part of the story. And Rand ultimately wins, being the dragon, by, you guessed it, simping for Egwene. Unbelievable. They also completely misunderstood Perrin's story arc. They intentionally gave him extra trauma to start it all off. Then he actually gets taken in by Tinker pacifism, despite in the books not being fooled by it in the slightest. And they also turned him into a vegan, which is, so typical for a wolf brother. And lastly, at least on plot, they undermine stakes constantly. So they keep getting chased by an army of Trollocs, and then it just vanishes once they're outside of Shadar Logoth. Completely gone. You have villainous White Cloaks, and Moraine acts obsequiously to them in the very first encounter, but their leader is actually pretty much a chump, and he gets stabbed by Egwene. And then, count them out, the fake-out deaths. Constant fake-out deaths. Remember that fake-out death? Oh, there were these ones. Yeah, you thought she was dead? Him too? No, they come back. Bet you he's back. Oh, that was just a dream. So's this. Oh, maybe he's back. Oh, yeah, we know he's back for sure. Fake out. You know what? Oh, yeah, another one. And I honestly, at this point, wouldn't be surprised that this little girl, she'll be back too. Fake out deaths. Lastly, strongest argument. You always end on the strongest argument. I think they undermined many of the characters in this story irreversibly. Matt Cawthon, first one, has been eviscerated as a character. In the first episode, they change him into a muff diver and a thief, although thankfully they cut the muff diving from the episode. By the third episode, he's basically a grave robbing degenerate. And in the sixth episode, he abandons his friends, which is the absolute opposite of his actual character trait. I don't care if the actor quit. If he did quit and you couldn't work around it, I think that's a bit of a cop-out. You could have cast somebody else. Or maybe you shouldn't have driven him to quit. Allan Mandragoran, the uncrowned king of the Malkiri, has been reduced to a pajama boy with a crap katana. I don't think anybody on Earth pictured their land like this. He doesn't know how to track. In fact, he has to ask Nynaeve what the tell is so he can finally find the woman he's been basically hunting with for 20 years. And then, getting back to it, the pump and dump. This is the complete opposite of his character. Oh yeah, and the nipples. Aaron's character has arguably been raped with a cactus, and I'm borrowing that from one of our members. He is an actual idiot rather than being mistaken by others as being slow. So he acts as his wife and then thinks it's his fault. His lust for Egwene actually makes him pretty much a scumbag because he's either lying or he got married to a woman that he didn't love. Unless, of course, what he's saying here is that he lusts after Rand. And that's where I got this tweet from, because I think he actually did it. So in conclusion, the sheer level of detritus that composes Season 1 of The Wheel of Prime is mind-boggling in both scale and scope. This presentation only contains a handful of the examples that I could have taken, and only 3 arguments, whereas I could easily found more. The Rings of Power, while awful, simply cannot match the unprecedented combination of retardation and malevolence spearheaded by Ragnar and his team of miscreants. But if you disagree and you think that Rings of Power sucked more, I'd love to hear your arguments. Anyways, thanks for your attention, and I think this is actually one of the shortest videos we ever did. All right, speed it up. Take care. Bye.